Following the large success of my 1960s garage rock guitar video, I wanted to dedicate some time to talk about getting a truly filthy garage rock drum sound. In the last video, we spent a lot of time talking about the 1960s as a whole, both in the socio-economical aspect and in the aspect of period-correct recording practices. If you haven't seen that video, I highly recommend you go watch that one first so you get a good foundation of where we're starting this video at. In this video, we're going to look at the garage rock drum sound in a more broad sense and not stay strict to 1960s. I will throw some pointers along the way, and I will be keeping the same spirit and energy. And everyone pipe up, pay attention, because drum tracks are crucial in setting the tone of your finished song. Drums are usually the first track you lay down in the studio, and it is paramount that you get a take that you are 100% happy with before you move on to other instrumentation. And almost all of the advice that is going to follow in this video can quickly be summarized in my 9th grade math teacher's favorite acronym, KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. As long as you keep that in mind, you are going to do just fine when it comes to garage rock drum recording. So let's begin by talking about the first step in achieving the garage rock drum sound, your drum set. You are going to want to go with minimal thrills here. You are not going to be recording garage rock if you're rolling out fills on your 12-piece drum set like Neil Peart, okay? Especially not so if you're going for a true 1960s garage rock sound. I've found a 4-piece to be adequate enough. A 5-piece is a luxury if you got it, and you can even get by with just a 2-piece, the 2 pieces being a snare and bass drum. A lot of good foot stomping fun can be had with just those 2 pieces. And the cymbal choice here is also going to be limited. My setup has hi-hats and a crash/ride only. Most people are going to have a dedicated ride and a dedicated crash, and that will work certainly just fine. This 2-cymbal setup was actually the way my drum set was set up when I first got a big boy drum set. And I've been through a couple iterations of different drum sets, different setups, different number of pieces, different number of cymbals. And when I first started recording my own music, I bought these 2 Zildjian cymbals, and I haven't looked back since. And I really love these Zildjian cymbals. They're from the 70s, and they are by no means flashy. They are bare bones Zildjian cymbals, and the pair of hi-hats I have is actually a bastard set of mismatched cymbals. I believe the top one is actually a crash cymbal that was cut down to a smaller size, and that was probably done because some jabroni was smashing on the cymbal with poor technique and cracked it. And just because we're recording garage rock today and there's a lot of energy and high octane fuel, that does not mean you should throw away technique and start smashing on your cymbals and your drums. Always treat your musical equipment with the utmost care. And on the topic of vintage cymbals are going to sound and feel a lot different than a modern set of cymbals. Modern cymbals are a lot thicker than vintage cymbals, and that really changes the sound. If you're going to want a lot of clarity and hard rock attitude, I recommend going the modern cymbals route because that will cut through the mix a lot better as opposed to vintage cymbals, which tend to be a little more washy, a little more subdued in the mix. And that subdued cymbal sound is a huge part of the 1960s garage rock sound. And now onto arguably the most important piece of your drum set, the snare. Your snare choice is going to add a lot of character to your end product. And for the garage rock sound, the cheapest snare you can get is probably going to do you just fine. You are going to be cranking down on this thing, smacking it pretty hard, and as long as it has a metal hoop, you're going to do just fine. I really enjoy metal shelled snare drums. I have a Ludwig Acrolite, and I wouldn't part with this snare for anything. And I could probably make a whole separate video on the Ludwig Acrolite. This is a legendary snare drum in its own right. But the important thing to remember here is that it's not flashy by any means. But especially the one I have. I have broken snare wires on it. The drum heads are really old. I even ran over this snare drum one time driving to a gig. And I was able to play the gig with said snare drum. These things are built like a tank. I love this thing. If you could find one, I highly recommend it. It is perfect for garage rock. You will also notice that I do not have a porthole on my bass drum. And this is rather unusual in a modern recording setup, but I prefer the sound of an intact resonant head when I am playing. I will usually vary how much resonance I have on the drums by placing a pillow on the resonant head. I like the option of being able to have no pillow and have like a really jazzy open drum sound. And I also have felt strips on both the resonant head and the battered side head for more muffling. And speaking of these felt strips, you will notice that a lot of my drum setup is very reminiscent of a 1960s setup. And even down to the badge resonant head I have. And all of this is kind of my feeble attempt to mimic some of the drum idols that really influenced me when I was younger and made me want to be a drummer. I also have some true 60s hardware on this drum set, but obviously the type of hardware you use is not going to influence your end sound. The only exception I will make to that statement is the classic Speed King, aka the Squeak King. The squeaking noise coming from this pedal will occasionally get into your drum track, and for garage rock, that is just fine. For drum heads, I have the classic coated Emperor on the batter side, and on the resonant side, I have the classic coated Ambassador. I think the coated drum heads give a more consistent garage rock sound as opposed to clear drum heads. The coated heads are papery sounding and very punchy, whereas the clear heads are more sustained and more of a modern drum sound. And if you are going to buy these coated Remo heads, you definitely have to buy the ones that say vintage. And that's not because the word vintage magically makes your drums sound better or anything like that. It is because the formula that they used for the coating is far superior to the regular coated drum heads. And this may seem really nitpicky, but if you just Google online about coated Remo heads, there's going to be a bunch of threads that come up that confirm what I am telling you. And if you're like me and you're always short on cash, your drum heads are going to be very old. A vast majority of the music I have recorded has been recorded on 4-year-old drum heads. And once again, this is not ideal by any means, but for the garage rock sound, this actually fits really well. And I think that perfectly exemplifies the importance of garage rock attitude. It's not about having the perfect equipment. It's about making what you have work for you and make it sound good. All this information I'm mentioning about a drum setup probably accounts for 5% of the overall drum sound. The other 95% is going to come down to the drummer behind the kit. And that may scare some of you if you are depending on yourself for a good drum track. But fear not, because I believe everyone has the ability to be a good garage rock drummer. You just need a minimal amount of practice. Keep it simple, stupid. At first, if you are not comfortable with the whole of your drum set, just start with your bass drum and snare. As I was stating before, you can get a very far way with just these two drums in garage rock. The most important part of being a drummer is keeping a steady tempo. No one is going to care if you could do a crazy fill like Keith Moon if you can't keep in time. As long as you're able to keep in time, you will benefit, and so will the other musicians around you. And a large majority of garage rock drumming is only going to call for simple drums. Something that's in the back, not leading the song, just there as support and for the rhythm section. And this will allow the other instrumentation to vamp off the drums. You and the bass guitar want to lay down a solid foundation for the guitar and the guitar lead to really take over. Additionally, you always want to play to the song at hand. Take the Ringo approach and orchestrate your drum part around the song. And with the territory of having a really simple drum setup, you are going to have to get creative when need be, especially with your dynamics. And for garage rock, or any genre for that matter, you're really going to want to employ your dynamics as a drummer in order to facilitate good songwriting. For example, if you want the chorus of your song to have a really big impact on your audience, you might want to play a little softer in the verse and build up the dynamics and wait for that chorus to kick in so you really give it all you got. And obviously all this is very subjective. It's really going to depend on the specific song you're writing, but in general, high energy, high octane, play to the song, and you're going to do just fine. Let's talk about the recording setup now. And I hope by now you understand where I'm going to go with this.
Keep it simple.
Very good. With that in mind, you are not going to want 1,000 microphones on your drum kit. What you should be doing is taking the cheapest dynamic microphone you got, slamming that sons of bitch by your crotch, and wailing away on your drum set. That, or take the same mic and throw it halfway across the room and have it act as a room mic. If you want that true early 60s garage rock sound, that room mic solution could be your best bet. If you listen to a lot of that early 60s garage stuff, the drums are really pushed far back in the mix. I don't think there is any close mics on a lot of those hot tracks. And this ties hand in hand with what I was saying before about keeping your drum beat and drum playing as simple as possible. When you don't have close mics on your drums and the acoustics are bad and you have a lot of room sound on your drums, you're going to want to keep your stuff simple. When you start doing crazy fills and start flailing your hands everywhere, the sound kind of gets garbled up and it gets really lost in the mix and it doesn't benefit anyone. In reality though, you should really only have a maximum of 4 microphones on your drum kit, and even with that, I think I am being generous. I've personally never used more than 3 microphones on my drum kit, and my usual setup is usually some variation of this. My first microphone is usually a dynamic microphone that I place very close to my bass drum, and I'm going to take a pretty large advantage of the proximity effect here to boost the low end naturally. The placement of the microphone here is going to vary greatly on the drum and the room you were in. In this room, I find this area pointed slightly off axis to work best. You can take the Kevin Parker approach and slap an SM57 right in the middle of the drum, and I have had success with this as well. Then I like to stick a microphone on my snare drum. I really like to use an omnidirectional microphone, and I like to back it off slightly from the snare drum. And the omnidirectional pickup pattern allows me to pick up a lot of other elements on the kit, mostly the hi-hat, the high tom, a little bit of the floor tom. And that omnidirectional pattern also avoids any off-axis coloration issues that you would see with a dynamic microphone if you were trying to do the same thing and capture a lot of the rest of the kit. And then for the third microphone, I use an overhead microphone to capture a complete sound of the whole kit. In reality, you should be starting with this microphone and adding microphones from here, because that overhead should be the basis of your drum sound. And because my ceilings are hilariously low, I don't actually use a overhead microphone in this room. I use a front of kick microphone, but it serves the same purpose as a traditional overhead. I like to stick a ribbon microphone here, and a ribbon microphone has a bipolar pickup pattern, and the front half of the microphone I use to pick up the drum set, and the back half of the microphone I use to pick up the rest of the room sound. And with this setup, I could move this front of kick microphone either closer or farther away from the drum set, depending on how much room sound I want. And I find this to be a better solution than sticking a dedicated room mic somewhere far in the recording room. And this ribbon microphone works perfectly for my purposes. It captures a lot of the low end of the bass drum and a lot of the high end of the cymbals. And I can change the elevation of this microphone in relation to the drum set and get a different mix of these elements. If I stick the microphone lower to the ground, I'm going to get a lot more low end, a lot more bass drum sound. And if I stick it more higher up, I'm going to get more cymbal sound and less bass drum sound. And this is, once again, going to vary depending on what I want for the specific song at hand. These 3 microphones are my usual go-to setup, but I do vary from this quite a bit, and I will change microphone placements, microphone types, a number of microphones. Sometimes I will record each microphone onto its own separate track. Sometimes I will sum the signals onto one track when recording. It really depends on the situation and what side of the bed I wake up on in the morning. And the microphone choice and placement and all of that is really secondary to the more important factor to your drum sound, and that is going to be the room you're in. The room sound that you have when you're playing the drums is incredibly important to the overall sound that you are recording. There's a solid chance that if you were watching this video, you are recording in a space that is not acoustically treated. And that is no different than mine. In all places I've recorded my own material in, I am recording in possibly the worst conditions possible. The room sound is always atrocious. But do not be discouraged, because for a good garage rock drum sound, we can use this to our favor. When you're in a recording space that is not acoustically treated, you're going to get a lot of natural room sound and reverberation. And for a good trashy drum sound, this is a great thing. You must keep in mind that a lot of great garage rock and a lot of great DIY music was recorded in some kid's basement with no acoustic treating, with sound bouncing all over concrete walls all over and making a mess of everything. Save acoustic treatment for when you want to record some songs for your grandma, okay? Because today we're recording garage rock and we're going to embrace the trashiness and the messiness that is going to be entering your microphone. And if you're going to want to go for that trashy garage drum sound, you're going to want to try to record everything onto one track as I described before. By summing all of your microphone signals and recording onto one track, you are going to be limiting your ability to mix the final sound quite a bit. And this limitation could be very beneficial to you for a garage rock drum sound. By forcing yourself to commit to one singular track, you're going to keep your drum takes fresh and dirty, I promise you. And this is especially true if you're trying to stick true to the 1960s drum approach. At best, if you're going to be recording garage rock in the 60s, you probably had access to a 4-track, and there's no way that a recording engineer is going to waste more than one track on your drum sound. You are going onto one singular track, and you have to make all your decisions before you print it to tape. Another crucial element to a good garage rock drum sound comes in the form of pushing your analog gear, whether that be a preamp, a console, or a compressor. The sound of drums through an overloading piece of analog gear is nothing short of spectacular, and we should not downplay that one bit. And as I mentioned in my last video about recording garage guitars, if you're recording straight to your computer, straight through your interface, I highly recommend you get some sort of analog piece of gear between your microphone and that interface. By pushing that piece of analog gear, you're going to be able to get some natural distortion, and it is going to fit into your track just nice. You are going to want to stick away from quantization like your life depends on it. If you're uttering the words quantization and garage rock in the same sentence, you're doing something wrong. They don't mix. They shouldn't ever be in the same room together. If your drum tracks are a mess and you think you need quantization, your drummer needs more practice. That, or you're going to have to learn to embrace the messiness of the track and learn to make it work for your song. There should be no room for compromise here. We want a final track that is stellar and that you are happy with and is not aided by a computer. When I am recording my drum tracks, I do not add any compression during the tracking stage. However, I do EQ the signal. And I like to EQ the signal for 2 reasons. The first reason being that certain frequencies act differently when recording to tape. And as such, I tend to cut a little bit of the lower frequencies and boost a little bit of the higher frequencies. And the second reason I like to EQ the signal when tracking is because I like to take a lot of the boominess of the room I'm recording in out during this stage. Once you're finally in the mixing process, you're going to want to do some significant EQing on your drums. I find that drums are really the only instrument where I have to EQ them, or else they do not sound good at all. You could get away with not EQing your guitars, your bass, maybe your vocals, but drums, to get that sound that we're all used to hearing, you have to do some significant manipulating. At least that's my experience. I might be doing something wrong. I don't know. When I'm EQing, I'm looking for 3 separate things. I like to boost the attack of the bass drum. I like to boost the snap of the snare drum. And I like to feather the sound of the cymbals, whether add more, add less. And as long as I have those 3 things dialed in, I'll have the drum sound somewhere where I need it to be. Now let's talk about compression. And this is a huge part to any drum sound. And I could go on all day about drum compressors and the best drum compressors to use and the ones that were used on all our favorite records, etc., etc. But keeping in the format of this video, it is best to keep it simple, stupid. A cheap VCA compressor is going to do you just fine. And I did a whole other video talking about the infamous MN50 compressor, which is known for trashy drum sounds. So if you haven't seen that video, I highly recommend that video, and it'll give you, a good background of what we're looking for when we're trying to get a garage rock drum sound. But in a broad sense, you're going to want to use high ratios, slow attack, and fast release. The high ratio is really going to clip off those high-level signals and push up the lower elements of your drum track. The slow attack is going to allow those transients to come in so you get that snap and that in-your-faceness. And that fast release is going to allow you to have some pumping. And pumping may not be the best term there, because usually when people describe a compressor pumping, it is in a negative aspect. But if you learn to vary the release time and get it somewhere where you want, that pumping can be very beneficial, especially if you keep your drum track simple and your bass drum and snare are on a consistent basis, and that pumping can actually help your drum track really hit you in the face. And I only apply compression to my drum tracks in one way, and that is parallel compression. For the uninformed, parallel compression is when you simultaneously play your raw, uncompressed track with a compressed track in parallel, hence the name parallel compression. And usually the ratios are high when you do parallel compression, but it's not a necessity. I think parallel compression is by far the best solution when it comes to drum compression, and if you haven't tried it on your drum tracks, you have to. Stop this video right now and go. And let's talk about panning on your drum set. When it comes to panning, you are only going to have two options here. You're either going to mix your drum track in mono, which is what I exclusively do, or you're going to do a hard pan and put the whole drum ensemble on the left channel or on the right channel. And you'll see this in a lot of early 60s when stereo recording technology was first starting to take hold. And sometimes that cheesiness can really help your garage sound. And under no circumstances should your drum signal be stereo. A stereo drum sound has no business being on a garage rock drum track. Now you may say, Mario, that is so subjective. How could you limit drum sounds like that? And then you're totally right. It's totally subjective. It's my personal opinion. Do what the hell you want. I don't give a f. That's about it when it comes to recording and mixing the drums. It can seem a little counterintuitive at points because you're not going to get a polished drum sound by any means by doing the things I say. And one thing that's going to stick out like a sore thumb immediately is the volume relationship between the individual components of your drum kit. And this is a consequence of using limited microphones. You are going to see the disadvantage of this limited mic setup in a few key areas. An area where it's really obvious is usually in the tom sound. Because you don't have any close mics on your toms, they are going to sound very low in the mix. And in order to combat this, you are going to have to compensate in the room for this disadvantage. You are going to have to hit the toms a little harder than the rest of the kit. And this is going to be true for the rest of the individual instruments as well. When you do your first take, listen on playback and listen to see what elements need to be hit a little harder, hit a little softer. Maybe you have to move a microphone to get the sound you're looking for. You're going to have to do a lot of trial and error with this setup. The most important part during your trial and error is to always fix it in the room and not wait until the mixing stage, because it is just going to be too late then. Another detriment to the limited mic setup in combination with the bad room sound is you're going to lose a lot of clarity in your drum sound. And this loss of clarity is going to come into play when you start doing fills. You may notice that a lot of your fills sound messy, even if you're completely on time during the recording. And that is due to the lack of close mics on certain elements of the kit, as well as the excess reverberation that is just swirling around in the room. When I was recording my drum tracks, they sounded great in the room. I was doing these fills like Keith Moon like you wouldn't believe. And then on playback, it just sounded like a complete mess. And I kind of learned that I had to write my drum tracks around the room sound. And there's going to be a bunch of people watching this video who thinks it's completely asinine that I have to change my drum tracks depending on the room sound. And I agree, that is asinine, but when you're dealing with a room that is not acoustically treated and the muddiness that is in the room sound, it's impossible to get a high fidelity drum track. And that inability to recreate a high fidelity drum track is where the garage rock drumming comes from. So embrace it. Don't feel so discouraged. Just have fun with it and do the best you can with the tools and recording space that you have. And that's all the advice I have for playing, writing, and recording garage rock drums. And I must make it clear, all of the advice that I have given today comes from my own personal experience, and what works best for me may not necessarily work what's best for you. It is your job to do your own experimentation, go through the trial and error process in finding mic positions, mic types, different workflows, and find exactly what works best for you. I think what makes garage rock is the DIY aspect associated with this self-formulation for recording music. I want to spend the next part of this video going over a real-time drum tracking session that I did for a song specifically for this video. And I'm going to stay true to what I initially recommended for recording garage rock drums. I'm going to take the cheapest dynamic microphone I got, I'm going to shove it near my crotch, and I'm going to hope for the best. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so in take one, I have my Radio Shack Highball 2 high impedance microphone about 1.5 feet above my bass drum hoop. Let's see what kind of sound we get with this setup. Keep in mind, when I'm doing all these initial takes, I'm also writing my drum part as I'm recording it, and I'm listening back on playback a lot and seeing what I like, what I don't like, what I could change, and I try to improve the drum track as I keep going in my trial and error process. To me, that sounds really thin and tinny. I'm going to try my other Radio Shack Highball 2 microphone. This one is my low impedance version, and I'm going to see if I like this one better. Okay, now we're picking up a lot more low end, and I'm starting to like this a little more. Something I want to do is I want to put a pillow on the bass drum because the bass drum sounds very boomy during this take. You also might hear the EQ of my drums start changing during each take, and that's just because on playback I'm sweeping different frequencies and finding an EQ that works best for this microphone. I'm starting to like this a little more now. I think I want a more direct in-your-face sound, so I'm going to try putting the microphone closer towards my bass drum hoop in a more traditional crotch drum mic position. In the next take, I am going to cut some 4K as well. On this take, I moved the floor tom over near the snare and the hi-hat just to make it easier for me to capture everything with the microphone. It still sounds like I'm not getting enough hi-hat for my needs, so I'm going to position the microphone to point directly at the hi-hat and hopefully get more sound in this take. Okay, now I have everything just like I want it. The drums sound just like I want them to. I wrote the drum part as I want it, and I'm ready for my final take. And for the final take, I am going to play the final mix of the whole song.
Well, who's for horses, you know?
And there is the end product of the song. That drum track is nowhere near a perfect drum track, but I think it works very well for a garage rock drum song. Now I'm just going to play through a few excerpts of some songs that I have recorded in the past, and I'm going to show on screen the setup, the microphone, the compression, all that stuff that I use for those each individual tracks, and hopefully this gives you some idea of the different types of sounds you can get. It's here, stay clear, hide somewhere near. Lights on, don't cry, open your eyes. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed this video and it inspires you to go in your recording space and start banging away on your drum skins. I have a lot of things coming in the near future, a lot of video ideas that people are recommending to me. I'm also going to be releasing my debut LP in a little bit. I'm going to put a mailing list somewhere in the comments that you could sign up for if you're interested in hearing that when it comes out in a month or two. And remember, kids, keep it simple, stupid. I'll see you next time. Good night.